In an Ottawa warehouse just meters from the Quebec border, thousands of empty aluminum cans sit stacked on wooden pallets, a silent testament to the fractured supply chains of North America. These are not just any cans. They are the standard 473 milliliter tall boys that have become the vessel of choice for Canada's thriving craft beer industry. Yet despite being stored in the heart of a country that produces 60% of North America's primary aluminum, these cans are technically American imports, caught in a web of tariffs and trade disputes that have pushed the cost of each unit from 15 cents to nearly 35 cents in just 12 months. The irony is not lost on Josh McJanet, co-founder of Dominion City Brewing, whose brewery sits just down the road from this warehouse. When his company organized a collaboration with brewers across Canada to create a beer made from 100% domestic ingredients, they hit an insurmountable wall. They could source Canadian barley, Canadian hops, Canadian yeast, and Canadian water, but the can itself remained elusive. We brewed an all-Canadian beer, all Canadian but for the aluminum can, which we could not source in Canada, McJanet explained, his frustration evident. The tall can, it turns out, is a product of deeply integrated North American manufacturing that no longer functions as intended. The journey of a Canadian beer can is a lesson in the perils of globalization. The aluminum is smelted in Quebec, powered by hydroelectric dams that give Canada some of the cleanest and cheapest metal production on Earth. But from there, the raw material crosses the border into the United States, where it is rolled into thin sheets and coated for printing. That sheet then returns to Canada to be formed into cans, filled with beer and sold to consumers. Under the new tariff regime, that aluminum crosses the border twice, incurring a 25% duty each time. The result is a cost structure that makes domestic production feel like punishment. Richard Alexander, president of Beer Canada, has watched the industry he represents struggle to absorb these increases. "I know of one brewery where their aluminum costs have increased 60%, he told Global News. It's having a serious impact on the brewing industry. For an industry where margins are notoriously thin, a 60% increase in packaging costs is not an inconvenience, it is an existential threat. Breweries are faced with a choice: raise prices and risk losing customers, or absorb the costs and watch their profitability evaporate. The problem is compounded by the fact that 80% of Canadian beer is packaged in aluminum cans. Unlike glass bottles, which are heavier and more prone to breakage, cans protect beer from light and oxygen, keeping the product fresh during distribution. They are lighter to transport, reducing fuel costs and carbon emissions. But these advantages mean little when the primary packaging material becomes a luxury item. The industry is trapped in a system it cannot easily escape, dependent on American processing capacity, that now carries a punitive surcharge. While the aluminum tariffs create chaos on the packaging side, a different kind of battle is playing out in the corridors of provincial power. In Nova Scotia, Oland Brewery, the iconic Halifax institution that has produced beer on the same city block for more than a century, has thrown down a gauntlet of its own. In a letter to the Nova Scotia Regulatory and Appeals Board, the brewery's general manager, Frederick Tofflermeyer, threatened to relocate production outside the province unless looming water rate hikes are reconsidered. The proposed increases from Halifax Water are staggering: 2 double-digit rate hikes in 2026, ranging from 15.8% to 24.5%, depending on the size of the water meter. For a brewery that produces the equivalent of 16 million 12-packs annually, the impact on water bills is substantial. But Tofflermeyer made clear that water is only the latest in a series of cost pressures. As the federal and provincial governments work to remove internal trade barriers, companies like ours may move production to jurisdictions where it is more affordable, he wrote, citing rising power rates, increasing natural gas prices, and the province's corporate tax rate. The threat carries weight because Oland is not just any brewery. It is the largest in Nova Scotia, employing 200 people and occupying an entire city block in Halifax's North End. Its brands, Oland Export, Schooner, and Alexander Keith's, are woven into the cultural fabric of the Maritimes. But Oland is also owned by Labatt, which is itself owned by Anheuser-Busch InBev, the global brewing behemoth with operations in dozens of countries and multiple Canadian facilities that could absorb the Halifax production. Lisa Watson, a professor and dean at St. Francis Xavier University, viewed the letter with a skeptical eye. "I think it's a little bit of flexing muscles. I don't think they're packing their bags and getting ready to go quite yet," she said in an interview. Watson noted that the Olin brands derive much of their value from their maritime roots and continued local production. Moving them would risk alienating a loyal customer base that associates the beer with place as much as taste. The threat, she suggested, was strategic, a way to underscore to regulators the real-world impact of their decisions. Duncan Robertson of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business offered a broader perspective. While he credited the Nova Scotia government with improvements to the business climate, including tax reductions for small business, he warned that utilities play an outsized role in shaping perceptions. "It's been a death by 1,000 cuts," he said, pointing to payroll costs, insurance premiums, and now water rates as cumulative burdens. For businesses operating on thin margins, each new increase compounds the pressure, making the prospect of relocation increasingly attractive. These localized battles exist within a larger war that shows no signs of abating. The Ontario government, under Premier Doug Ford, has maintained its ban on American alcohol for nearly a year, with more than $80 million worth of U.S. spirits, wine, and beer sitting in LCBO warehouses. Finance Minister Peter Bethlen-Falvey has been unequivocal. "The ban will remain until all American tariffs are lifted. We're steadfast about protecting Ontario workers and businesses," he told News Talk 1010, dismissing concerns about products expiring. The LCBO itself has sought to reassure consumers that most of the inventory remains viable. High-alcohol spirits can last for years, even decades, if stored properly. The agency noted in a blog post, "Wines and spirits remain suitable for extended periods, though beer and ready-to-drink coolers have shorter shelf lives." The agency estimates that less than $2 million worth of product has expired, a relatively small fraction of the total stockpile. Still, the image of millions of dollars in American whiskey gathering dust in a government warehouse has become a powerful symbol of the trade war's absurdity. Across the country, the impact on American producers has been devastating. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States reported that April 2025 sales of U.S. spirits in Canada plummeted by 68% compared to the previous year. While sales of Canadian and other imported spirits rose, tariffs not only erode access to key export destinations, but also stall investment, suppress job growth, and limit the industry's ability to expand globally, the council warned in a submission to the Trump administration. For companies like Brown-Forman, maker of Jack Daniels, the Canadian market has effectively vanished. The irony is that many of these products remain popular with Canadian consumers. Before the ban, American spirits held a significant share of the market, with Kentucky bourbon a staple in bars and restaurants from Vancouver to Halifax. But the ban has forced consumers to explore alternatives, and many have discovered that Canadian producers offer quality they had previously overlooked. Ontario VQA wine sales jumped by 58% in 2025, while overall sales of provincially produced alcohol increased by 20%. The question now is whether those habits will persist once American products return. Erin Dobbin, president of Wine Growers Ontario, described the situation as a high-stakes gamble. When the ban took effect, local vintners scrambled to buy every available grape from the 2025 harvest, investing millions in expanded production and upgraded facilities to welcome new customers. "At the end of the day, it is a bet on ourselves," Dobbin said, acknowledging the risk that consumers might flock back to their favorite California labels when the ban lifts. But he expressed confidence that once Ontarians taste what local producers offer, many will stay. The political dimensions of the dispute reached a new intensity in February 2026, when President Trump took to Truth Social to voice his grievances. In a post that targeted both the Gordie Howe International Bridge and Ontario's alcohol ban, Trump accused Canada of treating the United States unfairly for decades. "Ontario won't even put U.S. spirits, beverages, and other alcoholic products on their shelves," he complained, adding the provincial boycott to a growing list of irritants that included dairy protections and digital services taxes. Premier Ford responded with characteristic bluntness. At a news conference the same day, he made clear that Trump's social media complaints would not sway his position. "There's one thing President Trump can do," Ford said: "get rid of Canadian tariffs. All it does is it's a tax on the American people. It's an attack on the American economy. Get rid of it and we're good to go. Ford went further, suggesting Ontario might double down on the ban if necessary, a warning that the province's position remains entrenched. In Washington, the tariff dispute has exposed fractures within the Republican Party. On February 11, 2026, the U.S. House of Representatives voted to end the fentanyl emergency that Trump had used to justify sweeping tariffs on Canada. 6 Republicans joined Democrats in supporting the resolution, a rare rebuke of the president's trade agenda. While the measure was largely symbolic, it lacked the two-thirds majority needed to override a certain veto. It signaled growing unease with Trump's approach to America's northern neighbor. During the House debate, Democrat Gregory Meeks of New York stood on the floor and delivered a passionate defense of the Canada-US relationship. "Canada is our friend. Canada is our ally," Meeks said. "Canadians have fought alongside Americans." He pointed to government data showing that the amount of fentanyl seized at the northern border is minuscule compared to the southern border, undermining the administration's justification for the emergency declaration. Republican Brian Mast of Florida pushed back, citing Canadian drug seizures and the appointment of a fentanyl czar as evidence that the problem is real. The legal foundation for Trump's tariffs remains uncertain. The International Economic Emergency Powers Act, or IEEPA, has become the president's preferred tool for imposing duties, but its future is now in the hands of the Supreme Court. During a November 2025 hearing, the conservative-leaning court appeared skeptical of the administration's expansive use of the act. A ruling against Trump could unravel much of his tariff architecture, forcing a fundamental rethinking of how the United States leverages economic pressure against its trading partners. Meanwhile, the USMCA faces its own existential review. The agreement, negotiated during Trump's first term, is scheduled for formal review beginning July 1, 2026. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has made clear that Canada must meet a series of conditions to extend the pact, including dropping provincial alcohol bans, expanding dairy market access, and revising digital services policies. The list represents the most comprehensive American demands since the trade war began. Canadian officials are preparing for difficult negotiations, while the federal government has paused some measures, like the digital services tax, to create bargaining room. The alcohol bans remain a point of pride and principle for provinces like Ontario. The question is whether those provinces will bend to federal pressure if the future of the entire trade agreement hangs in the balance. The Export Development Canada has added $5 billion in capacity through its Trade Impact Program to help affected companies, but financing alone cannot solve a political problem. For Canadian consumers, the trade war has become personal. Antonia Mantanakis, a Brock University professor who studies consumer psychology, has watched the shift with academic interest. "Canadians are emotionally invested in this dispute," she explained, "and they are using their purchasing power to express that investment. Just as Canadians are taking fewer trips to the United States, they are also retraining their palates, discovering local wines and spirits they had previously ignored. I see the same pattern happening for consumers with wine," she said. "They are going to be less likely to purchase that Californian wine because now they've tried what Ontario has to offer." The question of whether Canada can build truly independent supply chains remains open. Richard Alexander of Beer Canada is skeptical. "The manufacturing of can sheet is a very, very expensive process," he noted. "The investments to create that kind of a manufacturing facility in Canada, with just a domestic market, it wouldn't make economic sense. For all the talk of economic sovereignty, the reality is that some forms of production require economies of scale that only the American market can provide. Canada may be able to replace American wine and spirits, but replacing American industrial capacity is another matter entirely." Back in Halifax, the Oland Brewery's threat hangs over the regulatory hearing scheduled for next week. The company has indicated it will not appear, allowing its letter to serve as opening statement. The message to the Nova Scotia Regulatory and Appeals Board is clear: weigh the impact of these rate hikes carefully, because the consequences extend beyond a single utility bill. If Oland follows through on its threat, 200 jobs and a century of brewing history could vanish from the Halifax skyline. In Ottawa, Dominion City Brewing continues to produce its all-Canadian beer, cans and all, paying the tariff-inflated price for aluminum with each batch. McJanet remains philosophical about the situation. We can't expect things to snap back into place, he reflected. That language around this being a rupture, not a transition. I think we're feeling that. The rupture he describes is not just economic but psychological, a recognition that the assumptions underlying North American integration may no longer hold. As the USMCA review approaches and the 2026 election cycle reshapes Washington's priorities, the beverage industry finds itself at the center of a conflict it never sought. From the water rates of Halifax to the aluminum tariffs of Ottawa, from the warehouse shelves of the LCBO to the factory floors of Kentucky, the consequences of this trade war ripple outward, and in the middle of it all, a simple question lingers. When the fighting ends, will anything ever be the same? The answer for now remains as uncertain as the fate of that $80 million worth of American whiskey, still waiting in the dark for a resolution that shows no signs of coming.